Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we dig into complex ideas, big historical moments, and philosophies to pull out the critical knowledge you can actually use.
And today we are tackling something a little different.
Yeah, today we're undertaking a mission that's entirely internal. We're confronting the biggest enemy to our own success,
hmm
an opponent that actually lives inside every single one of us.
That's right. This isn't about, external problems or competitors out in the world. This deep dive is based on Ryan Holiday's work, which gives us a really structured analysis of this internal opponent,
The ego.
the ego. And we should probably define that right away because that word gets thrown around a lot. We're not talking about the Freudian idea of the self, the thing that balances instinct and morality.
No, we're looking at the definition that actively gets in our way, the one that's all about an unhealthy belief in our own importance.
Exactly. Arrogance,
Mm.
self-centered ambition. It's that voice in your head that convinces you you're better than you are.
Or that you're owed something.
Yes, that the rules don't apply to you. And what's so powerful about the sources we're using is this framework. It shows that ego isn't just a problem for, the megalomaniacs of the world.
Right.
It's a structural vulnerability for anyone who has ambition or drive or even just a little bit of talent.
And that's what's so surprising to me. It's not just about big personalities. It's the enemy of real creativity, of working with a team,
Mm.
of having any kind of longevity in your career, and frankly, of just holding on to success once you've found it. This philosophy argues it finds different ways to trip us up at every single stage.
It does. And the framework breaks that whole battle down into three distinct phases of any ambitious life:
Okay.
aspiration, success, and failure. And our mission today is really to pull out the practical advice, the specific stories, so you can learn how to be, well, humble when you're starting out
Gracious when you succeed.
and incredibly resilient when things, and they always do, inevitably go wrong.
All right, let's jump right in at the starting level.
Let's do it. So aspiration. This is that first phase. We're full of excitement. We're setting out to do something new.
Business, a big personal goal.
Could be anything.
Yeah.
But so many great journeys just die right here, before the first big obstacle is even hit. And ego, tragically, is almost always the culprit because it pulls our focus away from the actual hard work.
And the first, maybe the most common sign of ego in this early stage is this temptation to just talk,
Yes.
to let talk replace the action. You see it everywhere, the constant chatter, the need for hype, the need to get validation before you've even, done anything. Why is that so destructive?
Well, the problem with talk, especially in those fragile initial stages, is kind of twofold. First, it gives the ego an immediate fix.
Okay.
You get that little dopamine hit from your friends, from a social media post, and it feels good. It acts like a little short-term reward.
Hmm.
But second, and this is the more dangerous part,
Mm-hmm.
the very act of saying what you're going to do, especially if it's this big, grand thing, it actually drains the psychological energy you need to go and do it.
So you're basically fooling your brain. You trick it into thinking the job's done just by talking about it.
Precisely. It's like burning all your fuel before you've even left the garage. And we see this play out perfectly, and I mean dramatically, in the political campaign of the author Upton Sinclair.
This was back in 1934. He was running for governor of California.
Right. And Sinclair was a famous writer, so he decided to use his biggest strength writing before the election was even held. He published a book.
The title was I, Governor of California, and How I Ended Poverty. And the key thing here, the really crucial part, is the tense he used.
He wrote it all in the past tense. He described in incredible detail all the amazing policies he had enacted as governor.
The success stories, the reforms, the triumphant ending, all before a single vote had been cast.
And the book was a sensation. Everyone was talking about it.
But the campaign itself was a total failure. You have this massive wave of communication, this vision all laid out, and the actual on-the-ground campaign just fell apart.
Yeah, people who were there noted that Sinclair himself seemed to lose interest after he wrote the book. It was like he'd already acted out the part in his mind.
Wow.
His talk got so far ahead of the actual work that the will to bridge that gap just evaporated. The validation he got for the idea of being governor was enough. It killed his need to actually do the hard work to get there.
That is genuinely terrifying. It's exactly what the philosopher Kierkegaard warned about. He said to express what is still in thought weakens action by forestalling it.
You're literally weakening your own will.
And this temptation is, it's everywhere now. Modern life is built around performance, around communication. We feel this pressure to constantly post updates, to announce the big new venture.
Right, the new workout plan.
Exactly. Why? Because being silent feels like you're not doing anything. It feels like weakness. And to the ego, being ignored feels like death.
But the people who are truly confident, they don't need to talk. Their validation comes from the work itself, not from the reaction they get for talking about the work. Silence is strength. It's how you conserve that energy. The task ahead is almost always really difficult and uncertain, maybe even demoralizing. You need every single ounce of psychological resolve you can get.
I love that practical advice from General William T. Sherman on this. His rule was never give reasons for what you think or do until you must. He said, maybe, after a while, a better reason will pop into your head. That silence gives you strategic flexibility. It lets you refine things.
It stops you from getting locked into a bad idea too early. If you announce your grand plan, you're now emotionally invested in defending that plan, even if you get new information that shows it's flawed. Silence keeps your options open. It keeps the focus where it belongs, on the project itself, not on what the audience thinks.
Okay, so let's say we manage to stay quiet. We're doing the work. Eventually, we start to get a little traction, and then we face a second, maybe even more dangerous question. What are we actually aiming for here? Is it status or is it results? This brings us to that fundamental choice, to be or to do.
This is such a critical fork in the road. It's where all the incentives, the office politics, the lure of getting recognized, it all starts to poison that early idealism.
And the ego loves it.
Oh, the ego loves to redefine what success looks like. It helps us shift from focusing on doing the work, the gritty, often thankless labor, to focusing on being somebody.
The person with the title.
The title of the corner office, the power. And nobody framed this choice better or more starkly than Colonel John Boyd.
One of the most important strategic thinkers in modern military history. He came up with the OD Loop Observe, Orient, Decide Act, which totally changed how people think about strategy, not just in the military, but in business too.
But he spent his career kind of on the margins, often ignored by the very establishment he was trying to help. He was a genius, but he refused to play the game.
So what was his advice?
He gave this legendary speech to one of his protégés, and he laid out the choice in these unforgettable terms.
He basically said there are two paths.
Two paths. He said, path one, you can be somebody. You will have to make compromises. You will have to turn your back on your friends. But you will be a member of the club. You will get promoted.
So you get the status.
You get the status. Then there was path two, which he called the path of doing. He said, or you can go that way, and you can do something for your country, for yourself. If you decide you want to do something, you may not get promoted, but you won't have to compromise yourself, and you will do important work.
That is so brutal, because it makes it clear that the system often rewards the image of competence, the being over the substance of the contribution, the doing, and we face that choice all the time.
All the time. The ego is obsessed with the image of success. In Boyd's world, it was the stars on your shoulder. In our world, it might be the flashy job title, the number of followers, the salary you can command before you've actually delivered anything.
It's all just appearances, and they're so deceptive. Having authority is not the same as being an authority.
Exactly. Getting the promotion doesn't mean your work is actually any good.
And the deeper danger here is that once you choose being somebody, you start defending that status instead of just doing the work. Boyd showed this by writing duty, honor, country on a chalkboard.
Right.
And then erasing it and writing pride, power, greed to show what happens to organizations that make that choice.
But here's the tricky part, right? In the real world, you sometimes need a little bit of being to get the doing done. You can't lead a huge team or launch a big product without some kind of title or authority. So how do you square that circle?
I think the key has to be your purpose. If your purpose is genuinely bigger than your own comfort, if you're truly committed to solving a problem, then you can use the status as a tool.
It's a means to an end, not the end itself.
Right. It completely changes the question from who do I want to be seen as, which is all about ego, to what do I need to accomplish, and does this promotion or this title help me do that work? All the other noise just falls away.
It clarifies everything.
Speaking of selflessness, let's talk about one of the most powerful and, again, really counterintuitive strategies for when you're starting out, the canvas strategy. This whole idea of being lesser, doing more, and realizing that sometimes, submitting your ego to others is the absolute fastest way to get ahead.
The whole point of the canvas strategy is to attach yourself to people or organizations that are already successful and just subsume your own identity for a while.
You're trading that short-term need for credit.
For long-term learning, for access, for a huge payoff down the road. It takes real humility to say, okay, for now, I'm here to serve their vision, not my own.
The sources bring up this Roman writer, Martial, who hated being an antiambulo.
Which literally means one who clears the path.
Yeah, he had to walk ahead of his powerful patrons and make way for them. He felt totally demeaned by it, like he was a slave, and his writing is just full of bitterness about the system.
And he completely missed the opportunity. His position gave him this incredible front row seat to Roman power dynamics, to human nature.
All the material a great writer could ever want.
Everything.
Yeah.
But his ego just kept screaming, I will not be demeaned like this. He put his pride ahead of the opportunity.
Now, contrast that with the strategic humility of a young Benjamin Franklin.
Okay.
When he was just starting out, he wanted to get published in his brother's newspaper, but he knew his brother would say no. So he started writing letters under a pseudonym,
Silence Dogwood.
Silence Dogwood, and he'd slide them under the door of the print shop at night. He got zero credit, and his brother made a ton of money from how popular these letters were.
But Franklin wasn't bitter about it. He was playing the long game. He was learning in real time how public opinion worked. He was sharpening his skills as a writer.
And he was learning that incredibly valuable lesson of making other people look good. He was learning in total obscurity, which meant he was free to make mistakes without damaging his own reputation.
It's the exact same genius you see in someone like the football coach Bill Belichick.
Oh.
His very first job in the NFL with the Baltimore Colts.
Mm.
Unpaid, he volunteered, and he focused on mastering film analysis. The tedious grunt work nobody else wanted to do. He just became a sponge, did his tasks perfectly, and this is key. He never got into public fights or tried to draw attention to himself.
He was a ghost, learning everything from the inside out. And that strategy, being the person who clears the path, who makes things happen behind the scenes, it doesn't just crush your ego when you need it crushed.
It also builds you this bulletproof reputation for being indispensable. The person who lays the foundation eventually gets to decide what gets built on top of it.
That's the payoff. Greatness doesn't come from demanding the spotlight right away. It comes from humble work, from choosing to be the least important person in the room until your results just force everyone to pay attention.
And ego driven by entitlement would have just said, no, I'm not doing unpaid work. I deserve credit. But they understood the work is what matters, not who gets the byline at first.
Okay, before we leave this aspiration phase, we have to talk about something that feels like modern gospel for ambition. This idea that you have to be passionate.
Yes, follow your passion.
Right. And the advice we're pulling from the sources here is, again, counterintuitive. It's don't be passionate.
This is a tough one for people to swallow, right? But the argument is that unbridled passion is often just a mask for weakness.
How so?
It's this breathless, all-consuming desire for some big, vague goal way off in the distance, but it often lacks any real substance or a plan. Passion is often about the feeling of doing something important, not the grinding, day-to-day commitment.
And you see examples in history where people failed because of their passion, not in spite of it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Passion can make you a zealot. It can blind you. Think about the disastrous 1996 Everest climb, where they had what was called Girl Odyssey, this fanatical obsession with reaching the summit no matter what the warning sign said.
Or Robert Falcon Scott's doomed expedition to the South Pole. His pole mania, his passion, made him ignore basic common sense planning. He didn't take enough supplies. He used the wrong kind of transport. His whole party died because they were fervent believers, but they were fatally unprepared.
It creates this dangerous blindness. If you're so passionate, you're so emotionally invested, you just start rejecting any information that challenges your beautiful vision. The inventor of the Segway was so passionate, he just assumed it would change the world, ignoring all the market realities that said, you know, maybe people don't want this.
So what's the alternative? If not passion, then what?
Purpose and realism.
Mm-hmm.
Purpose is like passion with boundaries. It's cooler, more rational. It's focused on what you can contribute.
Mm-hmm.
You think of someone like Eleanor Roosevelt. She wasn't driven by some fiery emotional passion. She was driven by a deep sense of purpose, of duty, and a methodical commitment to helping people.
Or the basketball coach, John Wooden. His style was famously described as dispassionate. He saw all that raw emotional stuff as a distraction, as a burden. His whole focus was just on perfect execution. Do your job, do it right, and the results will take care of themselves.
Purpose shifts the focus from, I feel passionately about this, to, this must be done, or I was put here to accomplish this. It's an obligation, not just a feeling. And you have to pair that with realism.
And how do you do that? How do you stay realistic?
Iteration. You don't need a grand 5-year plan. You need a series of small, concrete steps. Start small, finish that one thing, then get real objective feedback, preferably from people who don't have a reason to spare your feelings. Lock in what you learned, and then take the next small step.
Passion is often form over function.
Exactly. Purpose is function, function, function. If you're a little bit intimidated by what's ahead of you, if you're humbled by it, that's actually a really good sign. It means you're seeing the challenge for what it is. Deliberation and determination will beat naive zeal every single time.
So you leave passion for the amateurs. You make it about what you feel you must do, not just what you want to do. And that is the foundation you need.
Because if you build on that foundation and you actually succeed, well, the whole game changes. The dynamics of ego get way more insidious, the air gets thinner, and that internal battle becomes more important than ever.
Success is intoxicating. It's dangerous. And to sustain it, you need this deep sense of sobriety. The first big cautionary tale here is what's called the Hughes warning. This idea that success, especially when you pair it with genius, can lead to a complete and just catastrophic loss of grip on reality.
Howard Hughes is the absolute poster child for this. He was, without a doubt, a genius. Brilliant pilot, shrewd businessman. He took over his father's company when he was just 18. But his enormous, unchecked ego, which was just fed by all that early success and fame, created one of the most wasteful and disastrous business careers in history.
And his failures weren't small, were they? There are these monumental, legendary collapses. We all think of the Spruce Goose.
Oh, yeah, the giant plane. It took 5 years to build, cost $20 million, an insane amount of money back then, and it flew one time for about a mile.
And then he just kept it. He put it in storage for decades, costing $1 million a year. It was just this huge, expensive monument to his own inability to admit he was wrong.
And that wasn't a one-off. When he bought the RKO movie studio, his paranoia, his micromanagement, his just bizarre decision-making, he lost over $22 million and basically ran the whole studio into the ground.
The success that gave him the money to do these things also fueled the ego that destroyed them.
His biographers talk about him having this split mind. One part of him was a genius dictating these brilliant business strategies, but the other part was writing these irrational memos about what brand of Kleenex people had to use, or demanding these insane rules for how his food was prepared, while he just retreated further and further into paranoia.
The ego, when it's fed by success, it leads to these delusions of entitlement, of control, and finally, paranoia. One part of his business empire was working to make a profit, and the other part was just manufacturing losses, all driven by his need to be in total control.
You see the political version of this with Richard Nixon, especially when you listen to those Oval Office tapes. He'd reached the absolute pinnacle of power, but his ego and his success made him lose his grip on what was legal, on what was ethical. He just lived in this bubble where no one could tell him no.
He believed his power was above the law.
Exactly. Success can breed what one historian called this enraged imbecile mentality. You feel invincible, so you take these insane risks. The guy who created Beanie Babies, Ty Warner, he once arrogantly said, I could put the Ty Heart on manure and they'd buy it.
Wow.
His ego made him believe he was some kind of god of the market, not just a businessman who got lucky with a trend. And of course, he was wrong. The bubble burst spectacularly. That instinct to prove people wrong just curdles into paranoia.
So if you do get to the top, when everyone is praising you and the pressure is immense, how do you stop that from happening? How do you prevent that collapse into delusion?
The essential practice is that you have to always stay a student.
Always stay a student.
Yeah. When you have a big accomplishment, the pressure to pretend you know everything just skyrockets. There's an old Latin phrase, scientia infinitum knowledge puffs up. We start to believe our own hype. We've cracked the code, and we don't need to learn anymore.
But the reality is the exact opposite, isn't it? The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. The physicist John Wheeler said it perfectly. As our island of knowledge grows, so does the shore of our ignorance.
It takes this special kind of humility to grasp that, to feel like you know less, even as you're objectively learning more. Think about the Mongols. We have this image of Genghis Khan's empire as just, brute force.
Right, just conquest.
But the reason they lasted so long, the reason they were so successful, was because they had this incredible institutional openness to learning. They were constant students of the cultures they conquered.
It's amazing to think about. These are the same guys on horseback, sacking cities, but they were also master innovators. They're the ones who brought lemons to China and Chinese noodles to the West.
And most importantly, they fused technologies. They took Chinese gunpowder, Muslim flamethrowers, and European metalworking and created the modern cannon. They didn't have an ego about it. If a foreign system was better, they just adopted it.
That's the professional mindset. The jazz musician Wynton Marsalis has this great test for humility. He says, because they consistently observe and listen, the humble improve. They don't assume, I know the way.
The amateur gets defensive. They shut down when they get feedback. The professional actively seeks it out.
So the practical takeaway here is you have to deliberately put yourself in rooms where you are the least knowledgeable person.
Yes.
You have to actively challenge your own deeply held beliefs, especially the ones that brought you your success in the first place. It's the only way to avoid becoming that incumbent who gets disrupted by the next generation of hungry students.
The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said it best. It is impossible to learn that which one thinks one already knows. The ego hates harsh feedback. It prefers to believe we're already a genius. That's why you have to build systems in your life to force you to get that challenge, to hear things you don't want to hear.
Okay, so once you've achieved success, the habits and the systems that got you there, they might not be the ones that help you maintain it, especially when you go from being a doer to being a leader. This brings us to the challenge of managing yourself.
Right, of establishing order.
Yeah.
Leadership requires this profound shift in focus. And the greatest leaders understand that. When Dwight Eisenhower became president, the first thing he tackled wasn't some huge policy initiative. It was disorganization.
He had this rule, right, that he should never receive a sealed envelope marked confidential and secret.
Yeah, and it seems like such a tiny bureaucratic detail, but it says everything about how he saw his role. He saw that sealed envelope as a symptom of a broken organization. It meant people were too scared to make a decision or synthesize information, so they just passed the buck all the way to the top.
Mm.
Eisenhower knew his job was to set the big picture priorities and then trust his staff to execute. He needed to think, not shuffle papers like a boss man.
And you contrast that discipline with someone like John DeLorean, who we talked about earlier. He was this charismatic visionary. He had these incredible ideas for cars.
But he couldn't manage himself, and he couldn't manage other people.
Yeah.
His ego made him a micromanager. He couldn't delegate. And that disorganization is what ultimately sank the company.
He couldn't make that transition.
No. Moving up means you have to have the humility to let go of the parts of the job you used to enjoy. You have to accept that other people are now the specialists, and your job is to set the course. If you're too busy down in the weeds, micromanaging, who's steering the ship?
Micromanagers are really just egotists who are afraid to trust anyone else. They get completely overloaded because they think they're the only ones who can do the job right. But a successful leader creates an organization that can run without them.
And once you have that order and you have that success, you have to be on guard against this internal sabotage that's almost inevitable. It's called the disease of me.
Pat Riley, the famous basketball coach, he describes this perfectly. He says championship teams start with what he calls the innocent climb.
Right.
Everyone is selfless, everyone sacrifices for the team, but then you win. And the success, the money, the media attention arrives, and that's when the disease of me starts to creep in.
And individuals stop thinking about the team and they start calculating their own importance.
I should get more playing time.
I deserve a bigger contract. My contribution isn't appreciated. It's this belief that you've now earned the right to be selfish.
And the sources hold up General George C. Marshall as this incredible, shining exception to that rule. He seemed to be totally immune to the disease of me.
He had this completely selfless relationship with rank and honor. At one point, Congress wanted to make him a field marshal, and he actively discouraged it because he didn't want to outrank his old mentor, General Pershing. He put the institution and someone else's feelings ahead of his own promotion.
But the most amazing example is the D-Day command. This was the job he had trained for his entire life. It was his moment for supreme glory, and President Roosevelt offered it to him.
And Marshall's response was just immediate. He said, "The decision is yours, Mr. President. My wishes have nothing to do with the matter."
Wow.
He chose to stay on as chief of staff because he honestly believed that Eisenhower was the better man for that specific job, and his personal ambition couldn't be allowed to get in the way of the war effort.
That is just profound. And it's the absolute difference between ego and confidence, isn't it? Ego needs those external honors to feel validated. Marshall's confidence was so deep, so secure, he could turn down the greatest honor in military history just to focus on the task at hand. He understood that you never earn the right to put your interests ahead of everyone else's.
President Truman said later that what made Marshall different was that never did General Marshall think about himself. That's true greatness. It wasn't a calculated move. It was just who he was.
The great irony of success is that it can turn you into someone you never wanted to be, someone incapable of doing the work that got you there in the first place.
But if you can avoid that disease, if you can maintain that perspective, you can achieve incredible things.
Which brings us to the third phase, the one nobody wants to talk about but is absolutely inevitable: failure.
Failure isn't an optional part of the journey. It's going to happen. And ego is what makes failure permanent. It's what leaves you completely unprepared for a setback, because it's usually the thing that caused the collapse in the first place.
And the first most important choice you have to make when you fail is the choice between dead time and a lifetime. This is the difference between letting failure crush you and using it as this crucible for your own growth.
There was no better example of this than Malcolm X. He was arrested at 21, facing a 10-year prison sentence. He had failed by every standard, and he could have chosen dead time.
Which would be what? Just passive waiting?
Passive waiting, bitterness, anger, letting that experience just confirm that he was a victim of the system.
But instead, he made this deliberate, incredibly difficult choice for a lifetime. He decided to turn his prison sentence into his college.
And he taught himself to read in the most painful way imaginable. He literally copied the entire dictionary word for word, cover to cover, just to absorb the language. And then he just devoured books on history, philosophy, everything he could get his hands on.
So he came out of prison truly free, even though he'd been locked up for years.
Exactly. The physical circumstances were awful, but his mind, his intellect, his freedom of thought grew exponentially. He took this terrible situation, which was partly caused by his own earlier mistakes, and turned it into the fuel for his greatness.
That's the ultimate act of taking control, isn't it? Dead time is when you're just waiting for your situation to get better. Alive time is when you're learning, acting, using every single second, no matter how bad things are.
And it's not just for famous people. The psychologist Viktor Frankl developed his entire theory of meaning while he was in a Nazi concentration camp. When you're faced with a serious crisis, it can become the catalyst for something incredible, but only if you meet it with acceptance and humility.
When something bad happens to us, the normal reaction is anger. This is unfair. I don't deserve this. The ego tells us we shouldn't have to put up with it.
Right, but that's so short-sighted. All the time you spend fighting the reality of what's happening, that's dead time. A lifetime is the opportunity to finally do what you probably needed to do all along. Look inward and grow.
Another critical piece of resilience is focusing only on what you can control, your own effort, your own standards. It's this idea that the effort is enough.
It's the inner scorecard. And the story of the Byzantine general Belisarius just shows this with such brutal clarity.
He was maybe the greatest military commander of his time. He literally saved civilization, reconquered huge territories for the emperor.
But he was constantly undermined by the very emperor he was serving. He was subjected to suspicion, he lost his job multiple times, and according to legend, he was eventually blinded and forced to become a beggar by the paranoid emperor whose throne he had saved again and again.
Yet the one person you don't hear complaining about any of this
Is Belisarius himself. In his mind, he was just doing his duty, a sacred professional obligation. He knew he'd done the right thing, that he'd given his absolute best, and for him, that was enough.
That's the bargain he made with himself. He could control how he fought his battles, but he couldn't control whether he'd be rewarded for it.
And we have so little control over that stuff, the recognition, the money, the praise. If your ego is in charge, you need that external validation. And when it doesn't come, which it often doesn't, you're just crushed.
This is why Warren Buffett is such a huge advocate for the inner scorecard. The metric you should measure yourself against is your own potential, the absolute best you're capable of, not what the world gives you in return.
When you can get pride from just meeting your own standards, then what the world does or doesn't do, it can't break you.
It's that great story about Alexander the Great meeting the philosopher Diogenes. Alexander, the most powerful man in the world, asks what he can do for him.
And Diogenes, who has nothing but his own standards, just says, "Stop blocking my son."
True satisfaction comes from the work, not the rewards. Think about John Kennedy Toole, who wrote A Confederacy of Dunces. It was rejected by every publisher, and that rejection contributed to his suicide. Years after he died, the book won a Pulitzer Prize.
The book's greatness never changed. The work was always enough. The external outcome was irrelevant to its quality.
The ego always wants more. It needs more. And that just sets us up for failure. Doing the work that satisfies you, that has to be enough. Anything else is just a bonus.
But when failure does happen, especially when it's our own fault, the ego's defense mechanism is to deny it, to escalate, which is so incredibly dangerous.
And we're back to John DeLorean, the king of escalation. His car company failed because of his own mismanagement. A rational person would have cut their losses, declared bankruptcy, moved on.
But his ego was so wrapped up in the company, in the vision, he just couldn't let it fail.
So what was his desperate, irrational response?
He tried to finance the company with a $60 million cocaine deal. He was in a hole, financially and morally, and instead of stopping, his ego just made him keep digging until he hit rock bottom.
It's the sunk cost fallacy on steroids. When our identity is completely tied up in our work, we feel like any failure is a reflection on us as a person. So we double down on bad decisions to protect this false image of ourselves as a winner.
You have to find the courage to just stop, to draw the line. Alexander Hamilton, who ironically died in a duel, a total act of ego-driven escalation, he once told a friend in trouble, "If you cannot reasonably hope for a favorable extrication, do not plunge deeper. Have the courage to make a full stop."
That ability to stop the bleeding, that's real strength, not weakness.
And a great example of someone who did that, and it led to this incredible redemption, is Steve Jobs. When he was fired from Apple in 1985, it was because his ego was completely out of control. He was impossible to work with.
And he was devastated.
Oh, absolutely. He cried, he fought it, but eventually he accepted it. And when he lost, he went out and started new companies, NXT and Pixar. And crucially, he learned from the mistakes he'd made. He admitted that his ego had been the problem, and that humility is what allowed him to come back and save Apple later on.
And you contrast that with someone like Dov Sharney from American Apparel. When his company got into trouble, he just refused to step aside. His ego made him fight his own company until it was totally bankrupt. He destroyed the very thing he loved because he couldn't admit he had failed.
When you lose, you have a choice. Are you going to make it a lose-lose for everyone, or are you going to accept it and walk away with your integrity intact? Only the ego thinks that being embarrassed is worse than losing your character.
Finally, we have to understand that the long-term cost of all this ego, whether you succeed or fail, is bitterness. And we have to choose to always love, or at least strategically let go, to avoid letting our setbacks turn into this internal poison.
Bitterness is a choice. William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper tycoon, was consumed with bitterness over the movie Citizen Kane, which was a thinly veiled, unflattering movie about his life. He spent a fortune trying to destroy the film.
And what happened?
His campaign against it is the only reason we still talk about it today. He guaranteed its legacy. It's the textbook Streisand effect. His hate and his bitterness achieved the exact opposite of what he wanted.
It becomes this massive sword that just eats up all your energy.
Yes, we waste so much time trying to keep the world from disrespecting us, from displeasing us.
Frederick Douglass, who had more reason than anyone to be bitter, understood this perfectly. He was once forced to ride in the baggage car of a train because of his race, and a supporter was outraged. But Douglass was calm.
He said, "They cannot degrade Frederick Douglass. The soul that is within me, no man can degrade."
His response was pity for the people who were treating him that way.
Because he understood that only he could degrade himself by giving in to bitterness. Love, or at least acceptance, is transformational. Hate is just debilitating.
You see the opposite with Dave Mustaine, the guitarist who got kicked out of Metallica. Even after he formed Megadeth and had massive success on his own, he admitted that for 18 years he was just consumed by rage and hatred over how he was treated.
His own success couldn't even make him happy. His development, his peace of mind, was just arrested by this resentment he was carrying around.
This cycle of bitterness is just a slow self-destruction. The ego keeps that wound fresh long after everyone else has forgotten about it. Hashtag tag outro. So this has been a deep dive into that civil war that rages inside all of us, looking at how ego is the enemy in aspiration, in success, and in failure. And the message that really comes through is that this battle, it's not something you win once.
No, it's a continuous daily practice. The philosopher Danielle Bolelli compares it to sweeping the floor. Just because you did it yesterday doesn't mean the dust isn't back today. Every single day, you have to pick up the broom and sweep again. Humility isn't a final destination. It's a process.
We all want to be better at our jobs. Better leaders, better creators. We want to do great things. But what we so often get backwards is that focusing on perfecting the personal, on becoming a better, happier, more humble person, that's what often leads to professional success.
It rarely, if ever, works the other way around. Professional success almost never automatically makes you a better, happier person.
The tragic end result of an unchecked ego, as it's laid out in that old Hollywood novel, What Makes Sammy Run, it's not some big, sudden karmic punishment. It's a slow cancer that just eats away at your soul. It's success combined with loneliness and crippling fear. The real vengeance for a life of ego is the internal misery that it creates.
The only way to win this war is to fight it every single day, to make sure that the choices you make today are rooted in wisdom, in silence, in objectivity, not in the arrogant, demanding whispers of your ego.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. When you look back on your life at the setbacks and the failures you faced, will you see that you were broken by the world and killed by bitterness?
Or will you find that you were broken, and through self-awareness and humility, you actually grew stronger in the broken places? That choice is the true measure of a life lived well, a life lived without the enemy within.